Back in mid-2019, I was just young enough to not be able to have a job, and because of that, I didn't really have a lot of money. So plainly, I was bored, looking to play any game I could. And being a Sonic fan, there were a lot of games in the series that I hadn't played that I really did want to play, one of which being Sonic R. Now, it wasn't one of the games I was desperate to play. After all, the game had a reputation for being one of the bad ones, along with its laughable soundtrack. But then, YouTube graced me with a recommendation from Blaze Hedgehog. The definitive way to play Sonic R? Yeah, why not? I could spare 15 minutes. I checked it out, and setting it up seemed easy enough, so why not? It can entertain me for a bit, and I could experience for myself why the game was laughed at. So I installed everything, booted up the game, changed the controls, and I found myself actually really enjoying the game. Even the music, which I'd heard was ill-fitting and bad, was actually quite good and not at all bad. Sure, it had its problems, but one of the worst Sonic games? An embarrassment to the franchise? What are people talking about? But since I first played it, I've seen a shift in the fanbase where the game is actually regarded more positively, and I see a lot of love towards the soundtrack now. So why not go out there myself and talk about why I actually really like Sonic R? This game is probably one of the biggest reasons why I love the low-poly 3D aesthetic. Now, to be fair, I haven't played too many of the games of this era, but playing R got this style really stuck in my head. It got me to play games like Tori 3D or Lunistis when those games were released. While not the peak of this style, I think this game actually still looks quite good visually. The character models look nice, they pop out color-wise so they don't blend in with the tracks, and the lighting gives it a really nice feeling. While the track number is limited, they all stand out from each other and have a completely different vibe from the others. If you're a Sonic fan, you likely know how Sega tends to butcher the look of the games when making ports of them, like with Adventure DX or with Colors Ultimate. Sonic R is probably one of the first examples of this happening with the franchise, with subsequent versions after the PC port removing lighting, CD music, etc. due to advancing technology, and it made the game look worse than it should. But putting them back through mods really makes me appreciate how the game looks. I don't see many racing games have tracks like Reactive Factory or Regal Ruin, and it helps it stand out from its contemporaries. Like I mentioned before, the music of this game was something I'd heard a lot of jokes about, mostly towards Can You Feel the Sunshine and Supersonic Racing, due to their very upbeat tones and very cheesy lyrics. Coming into the game, I expected the rest of the soundtrack to be like this, and for me to also mock them. And I was right, the rest of the soundtrack was like that. But that's actually what makes Sonic R's soundtrack special. I don't think the series has had many other soundtracks like it. They're all very fun songs to get you pumped up while playing the game, and I don't think the game would work nearly as well if there were no vocals. It gives off a very nostalgic and upbeat feeling, despite me not even being around for this era or having any nostalgia for the game. I don't think it could be understated just how much I think the soundtrack makes the game better. Some of my favorites would have to be Living in the City, and Diamonds in the Sky. In the gameplay sense, while the tracks are all different from each other, the soundtrack is able to tie it all together and give the game some more cohesion with the musical style. This style of music and the Sonic OVA is something I'd like the series to embrace more for the future. Not so much for modern Sonic, but for classic Sonic. I think it would fit his games much more than trying to emulate the Genesis sound font. I'm not asking for every classic Sonic song to have lyrics or something, that'd be a huge undertaking, but I think for how classic Sonic tends to style itself, this style will work really well and help set the eras apart more. Now for the actual gameplay, often the most criticized part of this game, for many reasons, from the controls to the limited track selection and character balancing. Some of those things I don't have a defense for. While the tracks are really in-depth with alternate paths, and I enjoy all of them, I think having at least 2 or 3 more could have done a lot to add to the game's longevity and replay value to give people more to chew on. The character balancing is a criticism I definitely agree with. Some of the characters are just plainly worse than the others, and while that isn't as big of an issue when you're playing with the starting characters, the real problem starts once you start unlocking them, like Metal Sonic, Egg Robo, or Tails Doll, and picking them. Once you pick the extra characters, you can only race against those extra characters, and we get to the biggest part of this issue. While Super Sonic being the unequivocally best character makes sense, having to go up against him as an AI is ridiculous, and playing as him just takes out any challenge in the game. I think doing something like the Riders games, where Super Sonic has to collect rings to stay up, would have been good, although with how many rings there are on the track, I don't know if that would have really changed much. But in terms of the controls, I actually think they aren't as bad as people say they are. Sure, the characters don't turn as well as I wish sometimes, but an easy way to alleviate that is to use the bumpers to have the characters drift. Since you don't lose a lot of speed if you don't bump into the walls head on, it's easy to just bump into them and keep moving. Something else I find underrated about the game is the exploration in the tracks and how you're incentivized to do so. The game has a combination of shortcuts and detours. While it makes the map look like a mess at first, once you play them a bit, they start to make a lot more sense. Each alternate path requires you to have a specific number of rings to open them, and it'll lead to a shortcut or an area where you can pick up one of the Chaos Emeralds. The Emeralds, along with the Sonic tokens you can find, serve as most of the progression throughout the game. Collecting all 5 tokens in a race, and then placing in the top 3 allows you to race against one of the unlockable characters. And if you beat them, you can then play as them. To collect the Chaos Emeralds, you have to grab it during the race, and then place first. And getting all the emeralds, of course, unlocks Super Sonic. While a bit frustrating, the tokens and emeralds requirements actually make you have to get better at the game in order to make the requirement and keep the item. It's a good way for the game to incentivize replaying the tracks and to make you better. This applies especially for the emeralds, as the route to collect them usually ends up being longer, so you'll have to make up for lost time and catch up to the other racers. To get the emeralds, you have to open up doors with a certain ring requirement. This also unlocks many of the shortcuts in the game. I like how this makes a player have to think whether to use their rings on the speed boosters placed on the track for a big boost, or if they should save them to open a door. However, I do wish the tracks in general were a bit longer. This may come from my years of playing the game, but I think the tracks do tend to be a little too short, which adds to the lack of tracks problem. They aren't terribly short, but I do find myself wishing for more from some of the tracks. But overall, I think the track design is very good, with the environments being used in ways I don't see many other racing games do, since this is an on-foot racing game. It rewards you for your skill, while also giving players ways to catch up if they're falling behind, with skips or using doors that another player has opened and saving their rings. I can see a lot of the philosophy from the main games being applied here, with the tracks looking more like altered platforming stages and the different paths. You can tell the idea of the better you got, the faster you can beat the levels was something the developers considered when making them and adding all of these different paths. And it makes a really nice gameplay loop that makes all the tracks really fun to revisit. Is Sonic R the greatest game ever? No, it has several flaws and it doesn't have a large runtime compared to other racers. But it doesn't have to be the best game ever, and its flaws don't stop it from being really enjoyable. Its aesthetic, stellar soundtrack, and great track design all add up to making a game that I always really enjoy coming back to and running a few races in. While it's not the best Sonic game, or even his best racing game, I still think it's a game worth playing for what it does accomplish. I hope one day the game can get an official modern port, or maybe try this style of racer again, although I don't know how that would look now, especially after the boost games, with Sonic moving way faster than he ever has in the series. If you're interested at all in playing the game on a modern PC, I highly recommend Blaze Hedgehog's video, linked in the cards. It's super easy to set up, and it makes it the best way to play the game. But that's my piece on Sonic R and why I really enjoy it. A game I expected to walk in laughing at ended up giving me a lot of comfort and joy in a way that I don't think has been replicated by many other games. It's definitely of the era, but damn if it doesn't own that. But thanks for sticking through the video. If you enjoyed, I hope you like and subscribe. I hope to be able to get more videos out talking about different topics soon. Maybe in the future I can make a more in-depth video on Sonic R, but I think for now this suffices. I hope you all have a nice one, and I'll see you in the next video.